So, sir, we'll be starting at 5:05 sharply.
Yeah, I'm fine. Fine.
So I'll introduce you, sir. Good evening, everyone. We warmly welcome you all to this session of Water Talks, brought to you by the Energy Club IIT Bombay. Looking at today's global energy scenario, as we learn from our mistakes, which cause rampant destruction of the environment, we are gradually shifting to reduce this effect and phase these processes out. And we, at Energy Club, believe that solar photovoltaics will be at the helm of this technological solution. On this note, I would like to welcome our esteemed speaker for today's session, Professor Brij Arora, who is a visiting professor at the Department of Electrical Engineering at IIT Bombay. From 1972, Professor has been associated with Tata Institute of Fundamental Research at the Department of Condensed Matter Physics and Material Sciences, and now has been working on aspects of silicon-based solar cells at IIT Bombay since 2008. With over 2,800 citations, Professor Arora holds key research interests in the field of optoelectronics, quantum nanostructures, and solar cells. In this talk, Professor Arora will shed light upon various attributes of semiconductor devices necessary for conversion of sunlight into electricity, and then go on to talk about various solar PV devices and how they fare against each other. With this, I would like to hand over the session to Professor Arora. So you can start.
Okay. Good evening, everybody. So let us get into this topic so currently, of course, I was at the IIT Bombay as a visiting faculty until June 2019 from December 2008, and I had great time working with group working on silicon solar cells. In fact, I started right from the beginning when the group was established, and it was called National Center for Photovoltaic Research and Education, and I took part in education part of it, and so on and so forth. So today the topic is some flavor of something to do with photovoltaic semiconductors. I have been associated with semiconductors since about 50 years, and I mostly, as introduction said, I worked with optoelectronics. But after joining IIT, I took part in solar cell based work, and that also mostly silicon solar cells. So my talk will be heavy on that. But anyway, let us see what I have. I have sort of roughly outline here. First of all, some general introduction to solar cells, and then silicon solar cells as we make them at IIT and elsewhere in the world. And then some properties of semiconductors which are suitable for solar cells, and what type of solar cells can you make with them. And then there is some a few comments about some more modern topics like multi-semiconductor solar cells. So you see on my screen, so let me say that if there is a question which is related to the topic under discussion, you can please go ahead and ask me brief questions during the talk also, and some more questions which are which may be longer and require more thinking, that you can ask me after the talk. So I hope that is clear, that anything which you think immediately requires some clarification. Yeah? So on the screen, in my left side of the screen, what you see is a device based on a photo effect. What you see is an IV characteristics of something which is known generally as a LDR, light sensitive, light detecting resistor. It's a resistor. And the characteristics is that IV characteristics of a linear resistor are linear. Only thing is, when you shine light, and if that light affects the resistor, then the current increases, the resistance decreases. You can see that this is the IV characteristics in the dark, and for the same voltage, more current is flowing as you shine light. And in this case, this material is sensitive to ultraviolet, so it is written ultraviolet. I've taken most of the slides from literature, so very few slides of my own. On the right side, you see a characteristics of a solar cell. So what are the characteristics of a solar cell? Is like a diode, and so you can see in the negative side, voltage side, the very little current flows, and in the forward applied voltage, anode being positive, cathode being negative, you have more current flowing. So that is in the dark. So at zero voltage, of course, you have zero current in the dark. But um, so the same for the resistor also. At zero voltage, zero current, right? But you see, when you shine light, P1 and P2 happens to be two different intensities of light, and you can see at zero voltage, this is voltage axis, this is the zero of the voltage. The current is not zero anymore. Like in a resistor, it remains zero. But in a solar cells, even at zero voltage, when you shine light on it, you can short circuit the solar cell and current will flow. And when you open circuit it, of course, there will be a voltage without applying any outside voltage. So this is the characteristics. And this fourth quadrant, first quadrant, second quadrant, third quadrant, fourth quadrant. In fourth quadrant, what are this segment here you see? Can you see here these segments where I'm putting my arrow? uh, they are the solar cell characteristics. Okay, so I think the next slide will now say that these two things, which are energy gifts, energy efficient diode gifts of semiconductors to the community. One is that there is LEDs, which is also a diode, but it's a light emitting diodes. It converts electric energy into light. And then, of course, there is a solar cell, which is the topic of today, which does the reverse, converts light energy into electricity. Okay. So this is, of course, today's topic I will not deal, but there will be a slide which shows what is the difference, where the two things differ. These two pictures look the same because here it's not like a diode, it is just like the semiconductor. What is a semiconductor? After all, there is a semiconductor. All semiconductors have a band gap, and there is a conduction band here and there is a valence band here. Same thing picture on the right, it says LED and this says solar cells. So this is just a semiconductor, but the action within the semiconductor, in LED you have an electron which comes from conduction band to valence band, and it produces a photon, and that is the light which the LED gives. So it is something we call downward transition. Electron comes from higher energy state to lower energy states. The action of a solar cell is by a photon coming in, and if the photon has enough energy larger than the band gap, then an electron can go from valence band to conduction band and they produce electron hole pair. So these electrons now in the conduction band and holes in the valence band, they play the role of generating this this action of generating voltage and current. Okay, so light photon absorbs and electron hole pair is generated. That's the basic action. In an LED, electron hole recombination occurs and light photon is generated. Of course, there is some recombinations will occur in solar cell also. We'll worry about that a little later. So what does a solar cell look like? There are two pictures here. This is a real solar cell. Where do you see some things, which is some white lines here. This is thick, so carry current. This is called bus bar, like a bus bar. It's a cartoon of the same thing. And then most of the solar cells in the world today, they are made from P-type silicon. There are other types, but from silicon, if you make, there are some which are made from N-type silicon, but majority of them are from P-type silicon. And since it's a diode, so there will be this red portion. This is a cartoon, and so red portion is a thin layer of N-type silicon. So that makes the junction over here. And then these white lines which you see, they are the conductors which are called fingers. They're fingers, and then there is a thick conductor which carries the current outside to the outside world. And there is, of course, there is a rear contact. So these are the two contacts. One is at the top, one is at the bottom. And in this P-type things, this will be the anode and this will be the cathode. N-type will become the cathode and P-type is the anode. Okay. And when you shine light, anode becomes positive. That means bottom becomes positive and the cathode becomes negative. Okay. So now I have a borrowed slide from somewhere. It says GN Tiwari. So you see, what you see here, you see a current voltage characteristics of a solar cell in the dark. No current flowing when dark it is there. When you apply forward bias, of course, some current will flow because a diode, a forward bias in this direction. And here you see, if you apply voltage from outside, some diode current, this is a positive terminal, this is a negative terminal. So this is like the IV characteristics in the first quadrant. Now, if I do a process, what do you see? You see, in first of all, the light is shining on the diode, on the solar cell, and these lines show that now you are. So now the IV characteristics, and let me go back. So you see, this was the dark, and when you shine light, the IV characteristics change. You can see under light, the IV, so there is a current flowing at zero, and the equivalent circuit is now different. Equivalent circuit is different. There is a current generator here. This is the result of shining light. It replaces. So there's a diode, of course, as it was earlier in the dark also, and in the dark the current flow like this. But now you have the current flowing outwards even without applying any voltage. So there's a current. If you connect a load here, if you short circuit it, all this current will flow through this. And if you apply some resistor here, part of the current will flow here and part will be here, and some voltage will be developing here. And if you of course open circuit it, then no current flows out, and this will be the open circuit voltage right at this point. So I hope this is an introduction to the solar cell. Now for engineers, this fourth quadrant is the only thing for interest, uh, and that is plotted generally differently. Yeah, you can see here, previous slide, you have the IV characteristics. So as I said, the current direction has changed. So this is current and this is voltage, right? Okay. And now this particular quadrant is inverted. So the current which was down below is plotted up. Of course, voltage is plotted the same way. So this is the characteristics of a solar cell, which every engineer, every physicist, every chemist uses to work with solar cells. This is what is the fourth quadrant is inverted, just simply. And then there are some terminologies which all solar cell people have to use. So actually, if you connect a load, if you connect a load across the terminal and shine light on it, then there will be some current flow which will be less than the maximum current which will be under short circuit. And there is, if you multiply the current and the voltage, if you have short circuit, then the power is zero. And if you have open circuit, again there is no current, voltage is maximum, no power. But if you multiply, if you connect various resistors, you will get through this. So there will be a point where the power derived from the solar cell is maximum. And that is where everybody wants to work, because once you shine light, you want to derive the maximum power output. So that is how you define the efficiency. This is the P maximum divided by the light power which you are shining on, the ratio of the two, power in and the power out. Okay. So all solar cells have these characteristics. So now the cell, so remember that when we shine light, there is a short circuit current or current generated by the action of the light, that is ISC, and then the diode characteristics. Now you'll go back and you can see. So this is the diode. This IL, suppose it is I short circuits, then some current will flow through this and some current flow outside. So diode current, and they are represented here in this. This is the diode current. ISC minus I diode is the current which flows through the load. So now if the load current is zero, you make it zero, and then you get open circuit voltage, which is written like this. It is some kind of a logarithmic quantity. Current is directly proportional to the light which you shine on it. On the other hand, voltage varies logarithmically. So if the cloud comes in front of the sun, then the light will reduce, and the current will, if the light becomes half, the current will, so this ISC will become half, whereas the voltage doesn't reduce as much. Maybe out of 500 millivolts may reduce by 20-30 millivolts. Okay, so this because a logarithmic dependence on ISC, and the quality and the quantities of interest are written down here. There is a thing called fill factor. Fill factor is defined as the largest rectangle which you can fit in the IV characteristics. More the squarish the IV characteristics, larger is the fill voltage, and can give you current without applying voltage from outside. That goes to very more than a centuries ago, and there are some historical aspects. But 1954 is the date where present type of solar cells were invented at Bell Laboratories in United States. And this is some New York Times some report here. These people were involved in the invention, and their picture is in larger. You can see here. And Gerald Pearson, I think he was a chemist, and one of them is an engineer, etc., in 1954. And remember, their first solar cells were 4.5%, and today we have reached 27%. So that is a big, long ride. Okay, so a little bit, since we are on the introductory part, how do you use solar cells? Well, this is a single thing which you saw earlier also. So if you have many of these things connected in series, then the total voltage will be total number of them. Here there are 40 of them, and if each one on shining light creates half a volt, so you'll have a 20 volt. So this is called a module, and you can connect modules in series and parallel, and it will become a string. So there are strings and cells and modules, etc. And I have some pictures which sort of show you pictures of applications of this in I've taken from literature, so they are not necessarily Indian, but I have some two Indian ones also. But in any case, it's a little house on the roof, and then there is some kind of an agricultural roof. We have more of some solar cells, and these cells can be silicon and thin film, which we'll worry about that. And there is this building whose facade is such that it is actually a thin film solar cell, and light can actually get in, and so on and so forth. And there can be this is a power plant. So let a lot of there's a picture here. So I could get a picture of some 2.2 gigawatt house. So a huge power field here. So it's a 2.2 gigawatt, 2255 gigawatt plant. And then there's another picture which is from Kerala, where there are these floating stations on a lake. So there are all types of things which are happening. So you should, if you are interested in the field, there are many things. So please be alert, and then you can take part. But solar cell is only type of energy source which you can make really small, even as small as 1 watt. There are children who have lamps which are working with the LED. So here is the LED, which I tell you, this is a gift of the semiconductors to the community. And then there are solar cells which have charged a battery based on which these are working like that. So you see, you cannot have a small nuclear plant or hydro plant or any of these kind of things, but solar cells, they can replace a lantern and also become sources of huge city-based. There are days in I recently learned day in England where the entire power was derived from solar cell for a few hours, and several years ago in Germany also entire power was based on solar cell in the daytime. Of course, this has been possible. It was not imagined that actually solar cell will become such a common thing. And it has been possible because the cost has been reducing continuously. This is some kind of a curve again from the literature, and we are in 2020. This is this is a nomenclature which people use, dollars per watt. So I showed you last some things. So these days modules come. I'll show you next a module which is a huge one. And but anyway, uh, so a module may be having 300 watts output, a 50 watt, 60 watt output, a 12 watt output, 1 watt output. I meaning there may be little cells in that, and for little children to actually charge their small LED batteries. So this you can see that it is now reduced below half a dollar, which means about, let's say, about 30 rupees per watt, peak watt. This is actually say that's the maximum power which you can derive from that. And then um, this is some kind of a production in gigawatts of production, which so I will not get into this so many details. If you get into this, then there is no end to it, and so we will just get on with our topic. This is a company in China, and you can see how big the module is. This is 2.2 meters long here, and more than a 1 meter. It's from a very recent report. I attended some webinar and in that report. So modern modules are reaching 600 watts. I mean, that is a huge amount of power from one module. Okay. All right. So now let us get back to the topic. So that was the introduction. I wanted you to be familiar with things which about which. So we see we are working with semiconductors, and now first of all we'll talk about when a single semiconductor is used to make a solar cell. And so scheme using single semiconductor, which semiconductor to choose for solar cell, what band gap is good. So there is this very famous curve by Shockley and Quasar called Shockley Quasar limit, and it says, okay, you need a band gap approximately 1.4 ev to get the maximum efficiency of the solar cell. So this is something which calculation of which we will not get into, but that is what it is. But you see, some general idea I can give you. See, so this is a sun. It's a sun, the spectrum of the sun. This is varies from, as we see, outer space, and on the Earth, the light is from 0.5 eV to 4 eV. So photons of different energies are there. Now the rule of thumb is that you can absorbed in a photon in a semiconductor photons of energy larger than the band gap. Smaller the band gap, smaller than, so if band gap is 1.4 ev, photons smaller than 1.4 ev, they just go through. Whereas if photons larger than 1.4 ev will be absorbed. If it's a silicon, then photons larger than 1.1 ev will be absorbed, and photons which are larger than 1.1 ev will be absorbed, and smaller will be. So it appears that you should have a small band gap, because then you can absorb more photons, and indeed more current will flow. But actually speaking, the voltage which you generate, and I will not get into this a little bit of a technical aspect, the voltage is related to Eg. Smaller the band gap, smaller is the voltage. So you see, you cannot spin by actually having smaller band gap, because then the voltage will become smaller. So that is how that 1.4 ev, there is some thermodynamic way of arriving at it. So which semiconductor to choose, what band gap, etc. So I say voltage is less than the band gap of the semiconductor. And if you have a silicon which has a band gap of 1.1 ev, then voltage which you can get the highest, best solar cell is approximately 0.75. And that has been achieved. And so you see, that is how it is. So in silicon, since photons larger, so we say, okay, if you collect electrons and holes generated by each photon, then the maximum current which you can get in silicon from the solar spectrum is 46 milliampere per centimeter square. So depending on the area of the cell, you can get, for example, 6-inch by 6-inch cell will give 9 ampere. If you multiply by the area, you'll get that 9 ampere, okay, or some little more or something like that. So you see, this is so semiconductor which gives you the highest efficiency will be gallium arsenide, whose band gap is roughly 1.4 ev. So please remember, we are talking about efficiency achievable by a single semiconductor. So this is the structure of modern, or not state of the art industry, actually not only more state of the art industry, now it is somewhat little bit outdated. So this is a p-type silicon, and then there is a structure on it. You make it jagged, it's called texture, and the reason for texturing is something called light management. So if it's a smooth surface, then light will reflect. But if it is a textured surface, the light will actually get in and get back also. So you see, there are many steps: remove the damage, texture, diffuse to make a p-n junction, and then p-n will be shorting. So you remove the edges, and then you put something called anti-reflection coating, so that the light actually is. So this texturing helps as well as anti-reflection coating. Then you print the electrode and fire them. And so this is a very high energy intensive process. This is the achieved thing result in IIT Bombay. IIT Bombay, we can do all those things, and we have all the equipment to go, and our best cells have achieved 19.5, 90.4% efficiency, fill factor of 81%. And this, you see, that was 46% achievable, and this was 0.75. Yeah, that you see, please remember these numbers. and I will just speak about why it is less over something. Okay, and then there's a reproducibility, etc. So this is the status, and this is based on, let's say, classical thing. There are many developments, but already in the year 1999, this Australian professor, Professor Green, achieved something called 24.7% cells. I will not get into how you actually do that, but there are some requirements. So now these are, his cells were 4 centimeters square. These cells he made were 4 cent, small areas. But now commercially there are large area cells which are, so this is that result, which was nearly 25% now. And you can see the voltage is larger, the currents are also larger, fill factors are also larger. And this is some kind of a history of silicon solar cells, where this is a little bit old. Now it is about 27% silicon. Please remember, I showed you this slide where the theoretical maximum is approximately 30%. And currently we are at about 27%. Okay, so we are inching very close towards the theoretical maximum efficiency available with possible with silicon. So now you may ask me, okay, why some people are able to get, for example, this 26% cells or something, they get currents more than 40 milliampere, voltage close to 750 milliampere per centimeter square. So now why is that? What is this? Sorry, what is that which is different? So I have noted down 3 points. One is the light management. So better management of light. There are various ways the light, so whatever sunlight comes, in fact, the cell should be black. It should absorb everything. But real cells are little bluish looking because we have that reflection coating. So blue light is reflected, all the other mostly will be absorbed. And then there are some losses which occur. Some light may still go through because of limited thickness and other reasons, and something called parasitic absorption. I will not get into details of this, but you lose. So less you lose light, more the efficiency will be. Then there's a material quantity. I will expand on this theme a little bit, and that is the recombination in the bulk of the material. You need very few defects. And there is something to do with cell design, and most of the modern cells are working on this. To reach 27%, you have different cell designs. And even at IIT, now we are working on cells which we hope to go to 23, 24%. Okay, so that exercise is already on. So you see, this is the culprit, recombination. And so we generated carriers and some of them will recombine. So there are two ways to access carriers, electrons and holes generated by light. They can combine by coming from conduction band directly to valence band, or through a level which is created by a defect. This is what controls most of the silicon cells. So lesser the number of defects, lesser this process. So material quality better, which we will not be able to get so easily at IIT Bombay, because it is difficult to get the quality. And what is the characteristic of that particular? There is a quality, there's a factor called lifetime, and that's lifetime. I have slide here is called. So there is a lifetime of the material, and that is radiative plus non-radiative. Lesser the non-radiative process, larger this will become, because that depends, non-radiative recombination depends, rate depends upon the number of defects. So lesser the number of defects, lesser this rate will be, and more will be tau and r. So larger the tau and r, and so larger will be tau bulk. So we will like to have lifetimes of the order of millisecond, but the cells we are making, the lifetime of the material available is 50 microsecond to 100 microsecond, and we try to work with that. Okay, all right. Now, so this was all about silicon, you see. And silicon, I will talk about it a little bit. Silicon is actually a poor absorber of light, but it is the leader of the 95% of the cells used worldwide technologies are silicon. Rest 5% are made from all this. So there are thin film cell, and I will tell you what is the difference between a thin film semiconductor and silicon, which is requires thick. So how thick it is? It's about 200 micron. or it can be between 150 to 200 microns. So more than so nearly 2 orders of magnitude thicker than the thin film solar cells. And there are many types, and it will not be enough to talk about them. But I'll general make some comment. And there is this new guy on the this is the current high hope. This has almost reached the efficiency of the solar cells of silicon. It started much later, year 2000 or something like that. And others, organic solar cells started much earlier. There is CIGS, CDT. These are the names of materials: cadmium telluride, copper, indium, gallium selenide, and then of course there are dye-sensitized solar cells and amorphous silicon cell. And then there are some other things which I will tell you in next few. Oh, what is happening? Okay, so this is a very busy slide. If in fact I could tell you my significant part of the lecture is looking at this, because there are some. So what are all this in this? They're called multi-junction. So if your cells made, so what is it? First of all, this is made by a laboratory called NREL, NREL National Renewable Energy Laboratory of USA. They bring out this, and there is a Professor Green also. He brings out these things, and they are the best research cells. So people like you, if you get in research, if they find some new result, then there are some few 3 4 laboratories in the world, they will say yes, claim made by such and such researcher is accurate, and they will put a point on this cell. So if you, so this goes to 1976 and comes to right to 2020, and there are all kinds of things in it: multi-junction cells, single junction gallium arsenide, crystalline silicon, thin film technology, emerging PV. So various these things are plotted here. If I was to spend 5 minutes on this, of course, then we can come back if you have a question. Okay, all right. So let me just, so, but I want you to be familiar with this fact that there are people all over the world, so many people working in many areas, and many of them, there we have no point due to India so far over this. Okay, all right. Now, what is thin versus thick? Now, this is a property of the semiconductor. You see, what I have plotted here is something called absorption coefficient on the y-axis, and then the photon energy. Now, absorption starts at the band gap. So, silicon band gap approximately 1.1 eV, and gallium arsenide band gap 1.4 eV. But look at the absorption coefficient curve of gallium arsenide, just abruptly rises. But on the other hand, silicon chugs along slowly, and then it increases as the energy of the photon increases. So this material is called indirect band gap, and this material is called direct band gap. And the thickness you need for photons of particular energy, for example, if you take 1.2 eV photons, the value of the alpha, which is the absorption coefficient, is approximately here about maybe 0.01 or something like that. And then you need 100 microns of silicon. And actually, I told you 150 to 100 micron is actually used, because you want to go is to still close to the band gap energy. For gallium arsenide, it's already at about maybe approximately 1 alpha 1 micron, 1 by micron inverse. And so you need not more than 1 or 2 micron thick gallium arsenide. So in the next slide, I have also other materials listed: CIGS, CDT. You see, their absorption curves and coefficients, they match with gallium arsenide. Abrupt rise, they are direct band gap materials. And also this new guy called perovskite, ammonia, methyl ammonium lead in iodide, the perovskite structure. Those of you who are in metallurgy, they will understand the word perovskite. But anyway, these are the absorbs. So depending upon what the curve looks like, you will use. So this is a thick cell. This is how the thick, you will make thick cell out of absorption curve like this, and out of absorption curves like this, you make thin cell. So that is the major difference between thin cells. These can be made from a micron or 2 micron. And if we actually are organic cells, they are even now much less. Their absorption coefficient 10 times larger. So 1000 angstrom is much more than enough. Okay, and so on and so forth. And so you see, so here are some different technologies, and dye sensitized solar cells, and this is the thickness here plotted. You can see that these are very thin OPV, less than a micron, etc. So I hope I have sort of clarified that. This is a structure of that perovskite, and this is a cell structure, and we will get into it. And you can see that perovskites are advancing very quickly, and they are reached here something like let's see, where is the perovskite? Can I see it? I think they are reached something like 27% or some 26, 27%. So you see, this is these are the organic cells, and this is the perovskite. And latest things now. So that was all about when you have made a solar cell out of one semiconductors. But since long people have known that with one semiconductor you use partially. I told you that you use a light of more than band gap and a photon energy. But if you want to absorb more photons, then you can use two semiconductors, one with smaller band gap, one with larger band gap. And the larger band gap will absorb high energy photons, and the smaller ones will be so this is actually the latest. If some of you want to work in solar cells, this is a combination of silicon plus something else, perovskite, organic, what have you. All those things are allowed, and this is an area of great interest. To go beyond 30% for silicon, you need two cells, two semiconductors, and this is the topic in which IIT also is quite interested. Okay, so there are all these kind of things. So this is multi-junction solar cell. I wanted to tell you multi-junction solar cells. You see, this is a different type of multi-junction solar cell. I'll give you a picture of it where the efficiencies have reached. So there are they can be operated at one sun as the sun comes, or you can concentrate light. For example, in this case, light concentrated by 1 watt. It turns out concentration can increase the efficiency. So this is a number which you can see. Highest achieved number is 47.1, but it's a concentrated triple junction solar cell, or more, 6 junction, not triple junction. Triple junction is somewhat less of something. Okay. Now I show you structure of a triple junction solar cell. So there is a germanium. It has a band gap of 0.67 eV. Then there is some gallium arsenide, like close to gallium arsenide material, middle cell, band gap 1.4 eV, and large band gap 1.8 eV. So you see, it can absorb from starting from highest like 4 eV to almost like the 0.6 eV, 0.67 eV. So this is a lot of spectrum will be used, and the voltage will be the sum of voltage generated by this. But the design requires that current be the same throughout the cell, and that is a matter of great interest and design, etc. So I hope I have sort of now brought you familiar with various semiconductors which are used in various structures, etc. What are the other attributes you need? Well, you are going to use in large quantities, so the material, those semiconductor must be earth abundant. They should be non-toxic. When you make those solar cells, they should be low energy consumption. That is a great thing for thin film solar cells. eh? But 95% are made from silicon, and silicon melts at 1450 degrees centigrade. You need to, you grow crystal, you have to make higher than this temperature. And then PN junction type cells, which I showed you, they require high temperature processing. But there is a design of silicon solar cells, very high efficiency. You can see almost the top, where the temperature has been dropped to 200 degrees centigrade. So this is now the cell design and all those things come in. And then increasingly, they should be rugged and last long. Now, silicon cells should last forever. I mean, the modules made from silicon solar cells are supposed to last for 25 years, which means that at the end of 25 years, they should still generate 80% of the power. And I think I will stop with this. This is a kind of structure which low temperature thing is not a PN junction. You have a silicon, and there is on one side the heterojunction solar cells. And so, but there are many areas in which the work is going on. Is it called carrier selective contacts, etc., etc. And you see, so I hope I have sort of given you a flavor of what all this solar cell semiconductor, photovoltaic semiconductor is about. Okay, well, nobody stopped me, but whatever questions you have, you can ask.
Thanks for this talk. We do have some questions. First, we asked some pre-recorded questions. We'll ask them first. So there's this question which asks, can we make transparent, efficient solar panels so that we can also use the land for cropping?
Yeah, so I have some slide which sort of is very. So these are materials which are called organic solar cells. You see, organic materials, unlike absorption coefficients I was showing you of silicon and things like that, they have a relatively narrower band of absorption. You can see this particular red material absorbs light from 400 to 600 nanometer, whereas this material absorbs light from 500. So the current will be a little less, but this will be transparent in the 500. So you can very much generate, if you make a thin film solar cell and very high absorption coefficient here, you can make a cell which is 1000 angstrom or something like thick, and the rest of the light will just go through. So of course, indeed. So these are called building integrated, not all building integrated facade, where, or we can have for agriculture, roof will be a greenhouse where the top you will be making from this kind of cells, and light will go through. A green light will certainly go through.
Thank you, sir, for the answer. The next question is, how do tetrapod nanoparticles compare to quantum dot particles in respect to better performance in photovoltaic devices?
Okay, so this question I noticed when I looked at the questions. You see, there are quantum dot based solar cells, and now there are many different types of you see, one area in which I know people wanted to replace material was this dye sensitive solar cells. In dye sensitive solar cells, dye is the one which absorbs light, right? And some ruthenium dye was used. So people were they're very expensive, and we wanted to. So you see, they said, okay, now we will have some mixtures of quantum dots whose energy is dependent upon the size of their quantum dot. And so this was one area. So I have never worked in it, and I don't know much about it. But there are cells which have been made, dye sensitive solar cells based on quantum dots. And then further refinement, which I was not actually familiar with, that people are doing this. So tetrapods, and I looked up at the literature because the question was already asked. So he says that one important advantage of tetrapods over other nanocrystalline geometric forms is that they have four arms and easily connect to each other and to form porous network. Branch tetrapods nanostructures provide improved electrode extraction. So now one will have to go through this, because you see, what is the principle of photovoltaic? You have to excite electron hole pairs, but then you have to separate them. So the charge carriers must be able to move the electrons to the cathode and the holes to the anode. That is the basic principle. So what I understand is that these structures make it easier for transport of charge carriers. That's all I can tell you, but obviously needs much more. Okay.
Yes, I do hope that answers the audience's question. The next question in the pre-asked questions were, in the solar cell structure, does the recombination take place elsewhere apart from the junction?
Okay, I mean that is, of course, as you remember my slide on the recombination. You see, I talked about bulk recombination, but actually the culprit and all recent advancements which are occurring, they have to do with structure which will minimize recombination. This is a slide which we need recombination, and this is a non-radiative recombination. See, radiative recombination we cannot avoid. This is occurring in the mostly in the bulk, and but this occurs in bulk because of defects, and it also occurs, and that is the most important, at two surfaces. Surfaces are the largest defect in a solar cell. They are also source of non-radiative recombination, and so you want to avoid it as much as possible. And I can't overemphasize it, but you do something called passivate the surfaces. So the kind of solar cell I showed you, which is made at IIT, that back surface is not passivated very well, and the front surface has an insulator. Insulators, they satisfy requirement like broken bonds at the surface, and there, so bonds, broken bonds are defects, and so they fill something, and so insulators are the best, but you have to flow the current, so somehow the conductor must also go through, and so that is the whole idea. At the back also people are working so that you can cover it with insulator, and little bit you put so that the conductor goes through. So whole lot of it actually goes on at the surface, and all modern work, all modern structures work is going on, and even including at IIT now we are entering into that, something called perk cells, which will be, so front is already passivated, back should also be passivated. So you need the best material in the world. There should be no recombination, and junction is only a small part of it. It's because you saw that junction is very close to the surface, but there's a whole lot of bulk, and the carriers have to travel all the way. Electrons generated at the back of the cell must go to the front, where there is a cathode, and anode. Of course, they can come from various near the junction all the way to the back. So they should not recombine in between. So you need very long recombination times. That's how it is. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So the next question in the chat is asked by Ranjan. He asks, what is the reason for the sharp decrease in cost of solar cells during 2012? This was asked from the cost graph that you showed us in slide 21.
Yeah. So you see, there is a matter of so all, it's actually is a long history, and so many things which we know. We have to thank the Chinese for bringing down this cost of solar cells. And they determined that they want to go ahead and become the world number one. Now, this is not sudden. Please look at the thing. Chinese have been pushing. I showed you the picture of Professor Green in
Yes, sir.
Australia, and Professor Green had the first person in that paper is a Chinese. Chinese were sending students to Australia left, right, and center in 90s of last century. So they became the expert. eh. Not only in solar cells, they also became experts in making silicon. We produce no silicon in India,
Oh.
interestingly. But it isn't that there was no interest in producing silicon in India. Many people worked on the problem, but we never became commercial. So there's also a long history of it. But anyway, doesn't matter. So that is the origin, that the matters of scale became very large, and larger the number you produce, the lesser the cost. So this is some of the things. Yeah.
So,
And the other thing is the technology. Technology means the efficiency becomes larger. So you pay for the same amount of money, you pay less because the efficiency, you need fewer number of cells.
so sir, the next question is by Pankaj Chetri. He asks, at IITB, which material is used for the anti-reflecting coating, which you talked about?
So you see, in silicon solar cells world over, um, all cells use something called silicon nitride. This is another big development. Silicon nitride is an insulator, and it will actually um, be good for passivating N-type silicon. So you remember the top surface is N-type. It's the cathode. And so why it is so we will not get into, but it actually passivates it. It doesn't passivate the P-type. So at the back, you will not use silicon nitride. You will use some other insulator, which will prevent degradation. You will use aluminum oxide or some silicon dioxide and some such things, which are the things which are now currently IIT Bombay is also looking into, and a word over. So front is silicon nitride. No, it's insulator. Current cannot pass through. So how you make contact to the silicon, N-type silicon, because that is the cathode. So the process is a high temperature process. It's made in glass. A frit is the silver. It's a silver contact in glass which melts at about 800 and so on degrees centigrade, and that melts and actually dissolves part of silicon dioxide, goes through, and then makes contact with silicon. That is how it is done. And we also do the same thing. Yeah.
So the next question again is by Pankaj. He asks, what is the difference between charge generated with low bandgap semiconductor and wide bandgap semiconductor? He asks
So
in
that
relation to both
yeah.
lower photon energy and higher photon energy as well.
Yeah, so there is a slide which will show you what is the difference. Actually speaking, this slide will help to understand this. See this slide. So you see, this photon is having energy less than the band gap. So it does nothing. It will just be reflected and transmitted and has no action on the photo effects. Okay, but this is a photon which has energy larger than band gap. Okay, so now you see extra energy is wasted.
Mhm.
So an electron goes from valence band into the conduction band, but this arrow shows the energy of the photon. It has just gone up, and then very quickly, in very little time, that electron comes to the bottom of the conduction band, and rest of the energy is wasted as heat. There's a lot of effort to use that energy usefully so that you can do something about it. But all current devices use so if it's a 4 ev photons, and if it's a 1 ev band gap, 3 evs are wasted. So you generate heat from them. Okay, so this is the
Okay.
difference between a low energy. Okay, all right, is that answer the question?
Yes, I hope so. So I'll take two more questions and then
Yeah.
we'll end this. So this question comes from Ashif Akram. He asks, theoretically, energy conversion can be as efficient as Carnot engine. If that's the case, the solar energy conversion efficiently can reach beyond 50%. But what's stopping in achieving this Carnot efficiency?
So this paper which I mentioned about um, so one will have to go through that. Yeah, so actually it's a thermodynamics. This paper is dealing with thermodynamics. Oh, where is it? No, not here. Let me just see where it is. So actually there are no details. I don't have the details, but the brief answer is, so this is the paper which is a 1961 paper. It's not so very easy to read. A Journal of Applied Physics 32 and so many pages, etc. It's called Detailed Balance Unit Limit of Efficiency of PN junction solar cell. It's a thermodynamics related. So as the question asked by Pankaj, so there are processes which are related to the thermodynamics of the processes which are going on in the solar cell. So that has to do with the, for example, the recombination, which is some kind of a, if you say entropy, okay, it's of a, so there's a certain entropy in this process. You distribute that energy, you cannot get it back in any way. There's no recovery. The work done by the solar cell, what I showed you about that 4 ev photons, what do you do with it? 3 ev are gone, I mean, just like that. So therefore there is a limit to what you can do with the way this quantum device works. So there are more details which probably can, but I hope I have conveyed the basic idea that there are certain losses which are not necessarily there in the Carnot cycle. So that is the basic. It's a thermodynamics argument. He is right. He should compare with Carnot cycles. And you can see, if I use more number of solar cells, more number of semiconductors, I can increase that efficiency.
Mhm.
Yeah, I already showed you
Yeah,
47%. Yeah,
I hope that answers Ashif's question.
yeah,
I,
but maybe one needs to put more time into it. But there are subsequent references also which reassessment of limiting efficiency, etc., etc. Yeah. Okay.
so he's happy with the answer. We're glad about that. So I'll take the last question from the pre-asked questions. Because you mentioned China, I would like to mention this question specifically. How do we as Indians compete with China in the solar energy sector? And what role solar energy will have in energy mix in India? Like, what
Okay.
are the prospects?
Yeah, I think we are on the road. We are on the road to solar energy. There is no question about it. It started in 2009 or something like that. 2008, 2009. India became a participant, or actually, we promised that we will, world climate, we will follow all the conditions to reduce the climate change thing. As part of that, we started implementing steps which will reduce the dependence on the other fuels which are causing that climate change. Okay.
mm,
And so by 2009, I think, and we had a policy in place that we will go towards solar energy. That is actually renewables. So renewables, two basic renewables were wind energy and solar energy. And solar energy at that time envisaged had two different types. That is something called solar thermal and then solar photovoltaic. Okay, so these are the two solar kind of applications of solar energy. And then there is wind energy. And wind energy was we were able to import and establish fairly quickly in South India, in West India, and various places, etc., etc. As far as solar energy, solar thermal was concerned, there is not too much development. There is experiments in IIT and various other places, ISC Bangalore and various people, and low level solar energy, solar thermal, water heaters at the top of houses. That's also solar thermal. But to generate electricity, it requires much more. And there are experiments which have been carried out where you need a parabolic trough, and then you need to concentrate light on some receptor where the temperatures can go as few 100 degrees centigrade, and then you make steam, etc., etc. That is a involved process, and we don't have any plants working on them, but we have small plants. I mean, the research plant. As far as solar photovoltaic is concerned, now the country has something. I don't know exact number. Now we have very so present government, when they came, our earlier government of 2010, they said they will like to, they fixed some to 2020 or something like that, 2022. They will set 22 gigawatts of solar power by PV. And then present government said they will like to have 100 gigawatts. So now that is on. That effort is on, and it will go on. I think the way prices are rotting down. Now you see there are many companies whose business is to install solar plant and sell electricity. And so that selling price, of course, is very competitive. And so there is a lot of work required, etc., etc. But we are well on the road. But we are not, most of these panels and cells are imported. We make some cells. There are some companies making cells in India also, and modules. There are several companies. Wari, for example, in Surat also makes solar, and there are many others also. Vikram Solar, this solar, and Tata's make. So you see, but we have gone through a very bad patch. You see that the solar prices were falling rapidly, and Indian industry, they could not compete, and so we have gone through a very bad patch. And then the banks will not lend, or their lend rates are very high. Various things which we cannot control academically or anything. So you see, but no question about it that solar energy is being installed, and it will go on. 100 gigawatt 2022, if we don't achieve, maybe certainly 60 gigawatt will be achieved, because that is the plants based. And then there's a roof based. A roof based 40 gigawatt, that is the prediction, but many, that is the thing that may not be achieved. But okay, we will achieve fair fraction of it. That is my estimate. And so we'll need a lot of people, who understand these things. Now, of course, right now, government, there is a political aspect of it, and government is saying some things. But anyway, we'll see how it is, how it progresses. But I think many people in India, fortunately, understand solar cells, their technology, what are the developments, and so on and so forth, and are trying to work on it. Certainly, academic labs are very active, and hopefully, industry will take help from academics.
Thank you, sir, for that answer. just a personal question of mine. We talked about solar cells for solar. Do you think that solar energy as a field for research for many new entrants is saturated, or there are still many viable opportunities there?
You see, there is word over people working on it. And so what happens is, and all areas of research,
Mhm.
what happens is there are something called low hanging fruits. When
Mhm.
the area starts, then there are some simpler problems which need to
Mhm.
be tackled. And so there are a lot of such problems, and then a lot of people can engage in those. As the area matures, the problems become more difficult to find, then new areas should develop. Now, for example, I give you an example. Silicon is very mature. You know, we have
Mhm.
hundreds of gigawatts and so on and so forth. But what people say is learning curve is still going on. For example, I
Mhm.
told you about heterojunction silicon solar cells. Then I told you about contact selective, carrier selective contacts, etc., etc. So these concepts keep on coming on, but the developments are slow and steady.
Mhm.
But then now there are people who, engineering wise, who are talking of tandems. So silicon will saturate. So what
Mhm.
particular second semiconductor will be useful? That's not fixed. Whether it
Mhm.
will be an organic, whether this will be uh, that other materials. So that work is worldwide. People are engaged. What kind of structure will be useful, etc. There's an open questions on this. Even IIT is working on it. There's energy science people are working on it, and people in physics and electrical engineering. They're all interested in it, so they will work on it.
Thank you, sir, for your time. We hope it answers our audience's lot of questions and makes them enlightened. Just one last question, sir. There are some unanswered questions. Would you like to answer them as text and then post so that we could post them
I can,
later on?
I can do that. You send me those questions, and I will, if I can do that, I can try. Sure.
Thank you, sir, for your talk. We hope the audience has been enlightened with sir's knowledge, and we declare the meet officially done. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Thank you. Goodbye.